Aldous Huxley, born and raised in England in 1894, has come to be seen as a prominent futurist through his writings that discuss visions of the late 20th and 21st centuries. Historians and literary scholars study Huxley's most prominent work, Brave New World, as its literary style and complex futurist motifs and themes offer an intrinsic look into how the society of the 1920s and 30s foresaw advancement. Huxley's literary symbols within Brave New World and other works reveal a lot about the vision of the future and social, political, and technological advancements of the early 1900s. Huxley would have experienced the Russo-Japanese War as well as World War I before publishing his writing. To Huxley's work, then, war would have influenced the depiction of the danger of state-managed technology and population control. Clement Seymour's depiction of Brave New World describes the novel as a frightening reality of what the future might bring to a generation whose fears revolve around war, political upheaval, and advancing technology. Huxley's childhood placed him in an advanced place to learn about science and technology, as his grandfather, father, and siblings were prominent scholars in the field. While visual connections to Huxley's scientific background are seen throughout his work, we rarely hear about his devotion to God and how it influenced his view on technology. Huxley openly told of his prayers to God in which he hoped, contrary to his writings, that workers and masters would form a harmony and reduce the risk of a dystopia. At the conclusion of World War I, Huxley formed a sense that pacifism was the best way forward, as wartime psychological conditions made the battles so long and deadly. The problem with life in the 20th century was that the strive for a utopia, whether liberal, Marxist, or fascist, wanted to achieve an end without maintaining a certain religious faith. Thus, the separation of faith and a strive for perfection will lead to chaos. When looking at the words of repetition within Brave New World, we have to ask, what was Huxley's mind frame, and what do these words tell us about the world in which he envisioned? Bob Barr, in his review of Brave New World, places the novel within a modern context that intrinsically shows the reality within the fiction to be reminiscent of post-9/11 America. He compares the systematic totalitarian ruling of Mustafa Mond with the legislation and bailouts given to American companies and the banks after the crash of 2008. In Huxley's imagined world, all forms of technology and production are held under government control, and in effect, individuality and innovation are suppressed. When the US government bailed out Chrysler and General Motors in 2008, the companies had to allow for bureaucrats to have a say in corporate production, thus hinting at what Huxley alluded to. In the utopian dystopia in Brave New World, Thomas Edison, for example, could not foster innovation because the government wanted things to remain constant. In allowing a central government to run businesses, society runs the risk of allowing the suppression of innovation. As Barr concludes, a government mold cannot foster new paths for advancement. One of Huxley's other main works, called The Burning Wheel, reveals a lot about technology and ideas presented after he moves to America. This word cloud is particularly interesting because some major words hint at a shift from Brave New World. Huxley's experience and writings after Brave New World are different in tone and content due to his move to America and influence of a different religion. His life experience in America is assumed to be one inspired by great mysticism, according to Hal Bridges, through the experience of psychedelic drugs. Huxley's drug experiments led to the belief that he had direct, selfless connections with God that could not be disputed as magic or being psycho. As Bridges exclaims, this would form his religious philosophy inspired from the Indian Swami, with a very goal of mystical experience. As seen from the two word clouds, Huxley's works certainly draw on scientific and technological knowledge, but also with the belief that there is a God. What is striking is that Brave New World shows a society that is ultimately playing God by creating identical embryos for a unified society. Looking within a 21st century mindset, Huxley's ideas are not that far off. Beyond the context of war and technology, Huxley also shows a social construct of total rule, which would have been very visible in pre-1945 European nations such as Germany, as well as in Russia and Japan. To the mid-1900s, characterized by the old system, the prediction of technology ruled by government is not that far off. One of the prominent ways Huxley shows that he is an understanding futurist is that through his work Ape in Essence, published after his move to America, he believed that nuclear weapons and chemical warfare would prove to be the method of human destruction. By examining Ape in Essence, it is apparent that the author's complex understanding of the future revolves around the idea of his present, but shows how the technology will be improved insofar as a means of greater mass destruction. Notion of human races destroying each other were not new, but this was a very different way of approaching the subject. William Matter places the technique and criticism of the future as seen in Huxley's Brave New World and Ape in Essence out of a wider construct of the disliking of other utopia predictions that were mythical in scope. Traditional understandings of utopia were reminiscent of a false reality where individuality would be preserved and the world would be great. The 20th century predictions within Huxley's literature, then, form a slightly more realist vision, if we can call a utopia and dystopia realistic, of how the technological progress of the times would influence a dangerous hierarchic future. In this sense, Brave New World, as well as his other works, serve as powerful warnings that man may reach the so often sought for state of ideal commonwealth that would actually lead to destruction. In the recourse of Huxley's ideas, we can see that he was one of the few utopists to allow hierarchic struggles and sorrow to enter the earthly paradise. Perhaps the only way to achieve perfection is to make man less human, through technological rule and progress.